You're listening to the Law Lives Project. I'm your host, Anjie Vishayanan. I'm a lawyer that launched a startup focused on changing the legal profession through mentorship. Through this podcast, we will explore the early career steps of real lawyers to help students see that many of us didn't have it all figured out at first. It takes time to find your way in the profession, so we want to shed light on some of the challenges people face in the earliest part of building their careers. Each week, I sit down with members of the legal profession and chat with them about the paths they took to get where they are now, including the times they stumbled, the times they fell, and the times they needed a little help. To encourage candor and vulnerability on this show, the attorney guests will remain nameless, but their stories will be laid bare for your consideration.
If you've done any LSAT prep at all, you've probably noticed that getting ready for the LSAT is approximately as much fun as fighting off a pack of feral dogs barehanded. But Velocity LSAT is here to change that for you by making you faster, better, stronger, and also able to outwit any feral dogs in the area. Velocity is the online video course taught by me, Dave Hall, the guy with all the 180s. At Velocity, we guarantee you'll hit the 99th percentile or improve by at least 10 points, or we'll keep working with you until you do. Law Lives listeners can get half off your first month's installment or $100 off a year's subscription. Just enter code LAWLIVES, LAWLIVES, all one word at checkout. Enroll, get more details, and contact info at velocitylsat.com.
In this episode, I'll be speaking with another state civil trial court judge. We'll be going over his career path from law school to working in a personal injury law firm to his current role. We'll also touch on his decision to transfer law schools after his first semester and the ins and outs of being a civil trial court judge. Let's dive right in. What were the reasons that you chose to go to law school?
I probably have a little bit different path than others. I always really wanted to go into public service. I've known since I was very young, probably 14 or 15, that I wanted to maybe go into law, but definitely go into public service. And so in college, I was very involved in Democratic politics. I knew that someday I wanted to maybe run for office, and that law would be a good way to do that. And also, in high school, I did debate and mock trial, and so it was always something I really thought about doing. It was my way to kind of make a difference in the world.
How did you pick which law school you wanted to attend?
Well, that's interesting. Back when I went to law school, back in the early 90s, we didn't really have the internet. And so I grew up in South Texas and went to college at Trinity University, and had always really wanted to go to University of Texas Law School. It wasn't necessarily the easiest route. I applied right while I was still in college to George Washington and University of Texas, and got into George Washington and got waitlisted at University of Texas. Decided to take a real serious look if George Washington would fit with my life, and it really didn't. So I decided to apply the next year to Baylor and University of Texas. Got waitlisted again at University of Texas, so I actually started in the spring semester. They have a spring start at Baylor, and got into Baylor, started there, really liked it, and then learned from UT that I'd gotten into UT off the wait list, which I was not expecting. And I had a struggle. I really did like Baylor, but I'd always wanted to go to University of Texas. It's widely considered the highest ranked school in Texas, and so it's had really, I love Austin. You have a real opportunity to go into public services, which is what I'm interested in. And so I ended up dropping out of Baylor and going to University of Texas.
So you had to redo your first semester?
I had to redo my first semester. In some ways that was good, some ways that wasn't so good. So.
What were a few things you wish you knew before going to law school?
Well, obviously, when one of the things I'd suggest to people, I've had over 250 interns who have been to law school, and do a lot of research about where you want to go. I loved University of Texas. I have no regrets about going there, but I wish that I had done more research about other options. There might have been someplace else I would have looked at, but it was a little harder to do back when I was going to law school, and I wish I had applied more places. But it's a big decision on where you go to law school. In different law schools, you can look at rankings, obviously, and that's important. But there are certain schools that are really good at certain things. For example, Baylor is very good at litigation. SMU, which is here in Dallas, is very good at corporate. And there are other schools. Texas A&M in Fort Worth is known for being an intellectual property school. If you know there's a particular area you want to go into, it may make, on the margins, might make it more advantageous to go to a school that is not as highly ranked if it does what you want to do. So I would definitely say doing more research. And then it's really hard. I mean, your first year of law school, I studied more in my first year of law school than I did my entire undergraduate career.
Sure.
Nothing really prepares you for that, but you really have to be emotionally prepared for that. And so that's something I highly recommend your listeners think about.
Did you participate in any extracurricular activities while you were in law school, like moot court or law review or clinics?
I did. I was very, very involved in Board of Advocates. By the time I got into law school, I knew I wanted to be a litigator. I wasn't sure what kind. In fact, when I started law school, I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor or an environmental lawyer. I ended up doing neither of those. So at
Funny how that happens.
I know you don't always get to pick your own career, and so
sometimes it picks you.
Exactly. I actually say that to my interns a lot of times, and so I ended up. You had during your first year of law school at UT back then, you had the opportunity to apply to a lot of different journals. And when I applied, I thought I still wanted to do criminal law, so I ended up being on the American Journal of Criminal Law. And then I realized a couple months later that really that's not what I wanted to do. So I was not the greatest journal member, but I did a lot with Board of Advocates. I was on a moot court team, the environmental moot court team that went to nationals for representing UT, and then also did a lot of intramural mock trial and moot court, and then during my third year, I ended up being the trial director, so I helped organize all of the mock trials on campus, and I really enjoy that. I think that, obviously they're going to tell you that your first year grades are really important, and there's no question that's the case, but if you're like most people who go to law school and you don't get a job with one of these big firms, doing things like a journal or getting an internship or doing mock trial and moot court and other Board of Advocates activities can really make a difference.
Can you explain what Board of Advocates is?
So it has different names at different schools. At University of Texas, that's the organization that runs all of the mock trial and moot court and those types of competitions. Now there's negotiation competitions and there's transactional competitions. A lot of that didn't exist when I was in school, but they run those activities at the school. And if you think you want to be in a courtroom, I don't think there's anything better than being involved in those types of activities, because when you become a new lawyer, a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to actually be in a courtroom for a while unless you're in criminal law or maybe mass car wrecks. And so it's a really good way to get that kind of practice, and it looks good on your resume as well. Employers really do look at it.
And the competitions, the moot court competitions that you participated in, were they all just within your school, or were they a national level?
Both.
Okay.
So I did competitions within the school, and then eventually I tried out for different teams, and I got onto the moot court team. But at that point, I still thought I might want to do environmental law, so I was on the environmental moot court. It was kind of an unusual situation where it ended up being three guys who we didn't know each other that well, but we all went to the same college. We both went to Trinity University in San Antonio, which is where I went to undergrad. And we had a great time. We got fourth place, I think, out of 65 teams nationally. And for me, it was probably the highlight of my law school career. I really enjoyed doing that. But I encourage your listeners to really think about doing that. It's a great experience. It's probably, a lot of people know this, but the difference between moot court and mock trial, moot court is appellate advocacy. So you're arguing, you usually have to write a brief, and then you will argue different sides of the case as if you were in a appellate court. Mock trial is more like a trial, and you can actually do that in high school and college these days.
And did you get a better experience out of your intramural moot court or out of the national moot court? If people were to choose between one or the other, what would you advise them to do?
I don't know that I would choose. I would do the intra-school or within the school competition first to get practice, and then eventually work your way onto a team. You know, the good thing about doing it at the school is you get to do numerous rounds, and it doesn't take as much time. But the advantage of competing in a national competition, it looks better on your resume. The level of competition is higher, and it's really fun. I mean, we got to go to New York and compete with some really fantastic schools from across the country, and it's skills that doing those things in college are skills that you really will need throughout the rest of your career if you end up being a litigator.
Sure. What jobs and activities did you do between the summer of your 1L and 2L year?
To my 1L and 2L year. So I worked for a law firm. It was interesting, but before I got that first job, I really thought I wanted to do criminal law, as I mentioned, and I ended up getting a job offer with a small solo personal injury attorney in Austin who did kind of what's called toxic torts, which is basically environmental law for an individual or a group of people who have been injured as opposed to representing the government or a corporation. And it's very rare to see that anymore.
Yeah, I was about to say, that seems like a pretty niche practice area.
And it's with tort reform, it's really gone away. And so I got to work on some very interesting cases involving chemical sensitivity. And it was a great experience. I ended up working. His name was Earl Stalin. He's, I think, practicing in Colorado now. And it was a great experience. I worked with him for a number of months past my first summer. And it got me interested in kind of doing plaintiff's work. I never thought in a million years that I would go to law school and kind of do plaintiff's personal injury. But it was a great experience.
And did you go back to that firm in your second summer, or did you change to a different?
So, like many of your listeners, UT has an excellent, they call it now on-campus interviews. Sure. And so I did on-campus interviews at University of Texas, and the two best offers I got, in my opinion, were both up here in Dallas, where I am now. And I didn't have very many connections to Dallas, but I liked the city. And so ended up getting offers with two different plaintiffs firms, two excellent plaintiffs firms, one called Barrett and Budd, another one called the law offices of Wendell Turley, both at the time were the two largest plaintiffs firms in Dallas, and ended up working for both of those firms, having a great experience at both firms.
Oh, you got to split your summer.
I split my summer. That's more rare these days, but it was very common back when I practiced.
Okay. Did you do OCI to get that first summer job too?
I think it was it wasn't through OCI or what you consider OCI. It was just a posting at the law school, and I don't remember specifically, but I believe I called him, and I ended up interviewing and working there.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like OCI for 1L jobs is less common than...
Yeah, it was very uncommon then, and it's still pretty uncommon, although I will say with my experience has been with if you're at a top law school and you have good grades, or a lot of the big firms are beginning to do 1L clerkships. That wasn't very common when I was in school.
Were there any other experiences or connections or other factors that you think helped you obtain the right skills and inroads for your career after law school?
You mean in terms of what I did during law school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my 2L clerkships were both excellent. I ended up working at two, and I think at the time were probably two of the best plaintiffs firms in town. I'd already worked at a plaintiffs firm with Earl Stalin, and this reinforced my belief that this is what I wanted to do. I really like helping people, and it's a way to, in my opinion, to kind of help people if you have the right heart about it. And so doing that, I actually ended up doing another clerkship during my third year with a plaintiff's firm for not as long a period of time. Anyway, ended up really liking all four of those positions.
And can you generally describe what types of projects you worked on as a very junior attorney at that firm?
At the first firm?
Mm-hmm.
So I got to work on a lot of different types of cases, and so we had, I worked in what was called the negligence department, and so we handled anything from car accident cases to premises liability to governmental liability cases and we started expanding into even employment law. And really, really interesting cases. I got to work on kind of the most famous of all of the Catholic priest molestation cases. I got to work on a case involving abortion protesters who were harassing doctors and terrorizing doctors, and worked on a case against them, and got to work on a really wide variety of different types of cases. Not many people during their first 2 years get to do that. I got to try first chair at least one case that I recall, but second chaired quite a few larger cases, including some multi-week cases, and got to second chair what was at the time the largest sexual harassment verdict in the country against a restaurant. And so it was I had some really great experiences at that firm. It was very challenging. I had to work really hard, but I wouldn't give away that experience. It kind of allowed me to develop a thick skin, but also learned a lot about how to practice law.
And do you think you chose the right practice area coming out of law school? I mean, did you really love the work?
I do. I was very fortunate. I never would have thought I wanted to do that. I think if I went to the wrong firm, there are some firms that probably would not have been a good fit. But that firm and then the firm I worked at after that, both I got to work on some really interesting cases with good lawyers, as well as kind of more garden variety cases to kind of hone my skills. And so I think that I got very fortunate to find an area where it was challenging but also rewarding.
That's wonderful. It's rare that people come right out of law school getting that job that they really wanted. How long did you stay at the first firm?
About 2 years.
And what made you decide to ultimately leave?
It was a stressful place to work. Mm-hmm. It was a very stressful place to work. And I wanted to go to a smaller firm where I had more autonomy. I was mostly doing second chair work. And so I wanted to get to a place where I had a little more autonomy, could handle my own caseload. And I was very fortunate because of the pedigree of that firm and all the things I had done. It was much easier to find a good fit with my second job. And I think a lot of your listeners will learn this. Sometimes your first job is challenging, but if you develop good skills, you can really find something that's a better fit.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference between second chair and first chair? I think for a lot of law students, they don't really understand what those mean.
So first chair it's kind of like what it sounds. It's the lead attorney. It's the one who makes the decisions that usually they'll try most of the case, the opening statements, the closing arguments, the voir dire, that type of thing. Second chair is the support attorney. And so I got a chance to support some very good lead attorneys, but a lot of my time was spent supporting attorneys opposed to, I did have a small caseload of my own, but was spent supporting these other firms or other attorneys. And but that's kind of the difference, is the lead attorney versus the support attorney.
Right. So the support attorney is drafting and
Correct.
Going back and forth between opposing counsel, or.
I did at that firm. I did a lot of writing.
Okay.
There weren't a lot of attorneys at that firm that really liked to write, and so I ended up not just. We had to respond because these were large personal injury cases a lot of times, or employment law cases. We ended up having to do a lot of briefing to respond to summary judgments and things like that. And I ended up, because I was a young lawyer and I enjoyed doing it, I think I was pretty good at it, I ended up not only supporting my team, but other departments as well.
Sure.
And it was a great experience, but it's not what I ultimately wanted to do in the long run.
And so after you worked at the boutique firm, then you decided to become a judge?
Yeah. Well, I decided to run for judge.
Yes.
It's not that easy in Texas.
Right.
And so I'd always wanted to go into public service since I was, very young. And in Texas, it's hard to run for office if you're a Democrat. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunities. And so I had run for school board in 2001 and had won that, and had been serving it was a 6-year term. I've been serving for about 5 years. Really enjoyed that experience, and it reinforced the idea that I wanted to run for judge. And then we noticed that the races in Dallas County were getting closer and closer between the Democrats and the Republicans, and so I chose in 2006 to run for judge, because I thought it kind of combined my two great loves, love of the law and love of public service. And I and all 42 of us that ran for judge that year as Democrats won that year. It was known as the great sweep of 2006, and have loved it ever since.
And can you kind of explain the difference between the civil and county courts?
Sure. So civil district in Dallas County, they're very similar. Typically, in most counties in Texas, county court of laws have a limited jurisdiction. So, for example, you can only have cases worth up to $100,000, or up to $250,000, or up to $500,000. In Dallas County, we have what some people call the super county court, which is they have unlimited jurisdiction. So, for the vast majority of cases, if you want to file suit, you can file in either county court of law or a civil district court. Areas where there's some differences is if you have an appeal from a justice of the peace court, that will always go to county court. That never goes to district court. If you have an issue involving the possession of property, like an eviction, that would be in county court. If you have an issue involving title to a property, that's going to be in district court. So county court handles possession, district court handles title. And sometimes those can kind of overlap and you can have difficult decisions to make. But for the vast majority of cases in Dallas County, attorneys can decide to file in either court. They're very similar jurisdictions.
And can you describe what types of cases do you mostly see in your court?
So we're a civil court. So I like to say we do kind of everything that you see right after your first year of law school. So we handle probably our most common cases are car wreck personal injury cases. We have a lot of those cases, but we handle all types of personal injury cases from car wrecks, governmental liability, medical malpractice, products liability, kind of any type of liability case you could handle involving personal injury, premises liability as well. We also handle commercial cases, so that could range anywhere from it's unusual to see this in district court anymore, but a $2,000 credit card case all the way up to a multi-billion-dollar dispute between multinational corporations and
Sure.
everything in between. We also handle employment law cases. A lot of those go to federal court, but we do have some discrimination cases, a lot of cases where somebody has allegedly breached their employment contract by usually in a non-competition agreement, all sorts of different types of employment disputes. We handle real estate cases where people are fighting over the title of the real estate. We handle what are called civil forfeitures, I didn't know that when I took over this court, that was handled in a civil court, but you probably have heard about it on the news where people where somebody has been accused of committing a crime, and then the state wants to take the proceeds of that crime or the property that was used in the commission of that crime. And there's a recent case out of the U.S. Supreme Court that kind of changed the law on that, but I don't really want to get into too much of the details of that. But we see a fair number of those as well. So really any type of case that involves money that's not between family members, it's not in the family code, and there's not in the probate code, it's going to be in our court.
Okay. And about how much of your time do you spend actually in court or hearings versus preparing for your cases?
It really depends. Probably on average 70% in court, 30% out of court, but it varies week to week. Next week I'm going to be in a multi-week trial, so all of my time is going to be in a courtroom. This week I had a one-day car wreck and also 3 or 4 non-jury trials. So today, for example, the reason I was able to meet with you today is that I did not have a trial today. So it varies, but definitely more time in the courtroom than outside of the courtroom.
And can you describe some of the discrete tasks that you have to do as a judge? Do you draft your own orders? Do you draft any of those materials still, or do you have support staff who can do that?
In contrast to federal court, where they have smaller caseloads and they have a much more robust staff, they have law clerks who will write their opinions. We don't typically write our own opinions. We don't typically write our own orders. I'll do that occasionally. And so, we spend a lot of our time signing orders, sometimes modifying orders if we get an order that isn't in the correct format. We spend a lot of time in hearings where people are trying to argue before trial that the case should be dismissed or they need additional information through discovery, things like that, different pretrial issues. I spend a good bit of time actually in trial, and that would include presiding over voir dire, opening statement, witness examination, closing arguments, instructing the jury. And so those are some of the discrete type of tasks I do. But there's not a whole lot of writing in what I do. There's some, but there's not a whole lot of writing.
But definitely, as you started as an attorney, there was a lot of writing.
Tremendous amount of writing. And I would say for most people who do civil litigation, you need to be a reasonably good writer. A lot of what we do, and I should say I spend a lot of time just reading because to prepare for a hearing, I have to read all of the dockets, everything that's related to those hearings. So on a typical Monday, which is my hearing date, I may have anywhere from 15 to 25 hearings that I have to prepare for all of those. So I do spend quite a bit of time reading as well.
How is performance evaluated in your current position? Is it mostly by your constituents?
Yeah, it's a strange system because as a judge, I went to a seminar recently and they said, it's an interesting job because you don't really have a boss. You have the people of Dallas County, obviously. I've had 4 elections for judge, and 3 of those were contested. Unfortunately, I won all of them. But some sense my boss is the citizens of Dallas County, but as they pointed out in the seminar, they're not there every day. Mm-hmm. There have been some very good judges who have lost, even though they did nothing wrong in elections, and there are bad judges, people who consider not as good judges, have continued on. And so it's kind of an unusual situation. You have a certain degree of autonomy. Obviously, your papers are kind of graded by the Court of Appeals, so you always want to try to do your best, but you don't really have a supervisor in a traditional sense.
When you were an attorney, how was your performance evaluated? Was it yearly or?
Neither of the firms really did like a formal evaluation process. At both firms, I was paid in part on the amount of money that I generated for the firm, so that was really what they looked at is
business development.
How much did I settle? How much I got paid a base salary, and then I got paid a percentage of every case I worked on, and then a higher percentage of a case that I brought in. And so that was a big part of the evaluation. My first firm did have some metrics they looked at that were interesting, like how many lines you wrote in terms of for motions and briefs.
Oh, interesting.
Which for me was good because it was the one area where I really, I didn't get a chance to first chair many cases, and so it was an area that I could kind of shine because I did a lot of writing for everyone else. But
sure. And so getting paid on, I guess, somewhat of a varying basis, is that very common in personal injury firms? Or
yes, it's okay. My experience has been most personal injury firms are going to pay. Now, it's changed somewhat. When I was in private practice, it was lower base, higher bonus, and now most firms seem to be going to higher base, lower bonus. I would have preferred a higher base, lower bonus. It was hard to... my income would fluctuate so much from month to month that it was kind of hard once we had kids you wanted to make sure you made enough to cover all the bills, and that was always challenging.
You need more predictability once you have a family.
That is nice. The thing about being a judge is we don't get a lot of raises, but we get the same paycheck every month. So.
Makes for planning easier.
It does.
So what are some of the leading bar associations or professional organizations that you participate in now? Because I think being in a judge role, you sort of participate in different organizations than when you're in private practice.
So it's interesting. When I was in private practice, I worked a lot with the Dallas Trial Lawyers, which is an organization of plaintiffs' lawyers, but I also was very involved in, this wasn't necessarily great on business development. It was something I believed in. It was worked with a group called the Dallas Homeowners League, which advocated for the rights of homeowners and neighborhood associations to have livable neighborhoods. And I really did a lot with them. I was president of that organization for 3 years and president of the statewide organization for a year. And it ended up, that was a lot of what I did. I wasn't involved with traditional bar activities. When I became a judge, I realized I really couldn't do that anymore because you're not allowed to be in organizations that might be before the court. And so I got much more involved in the bar. I'm now on the board of directors of the Dallas Bar Association. We have about 11,000 members. I'm also still involved with the Dallas Trial Lawyers and helping them develop programming. A lot of what I do with the bar is either speaking at continuing legal education seminars, or which I do quite a bit of, or I work with interns, and I've had over 250 interns over the last 12 years, more than any other judge, which is, I'm not sure that was the smartest thing, but I enjoy doing it. But it's my way to give back, and so I've had some great interns. I've had high school interns, college interns, law school, mostly law school interns, but even post-law school interns and people looking for jobs. And also been involved with a lot of what are called the sister bars in Dallas and the Dallas bar. So the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, J.L. Turner, which is the African American bar, the Dallas Hispanic bar, even the Dallas Asian American bar. I've done stuff helping them with programming or attending events or things like that. So one of the things I really enjoyed about being a judge that I didn't really anticipate when I ran was I've gotten a chance to do a lot of good and be involved in a lot of things that I would not have probably been able to do but for the fact that I'm a judge.
Mm-hmm. And what are some character traits do you think someone needs to possess to excel in a position like yours?
So it's interesting. As an elected judge, it's kind of different than it is. We're actually looking out the window over here, and you can see the federal courthouse. Federal judges are appointed for life. So once they get through the nomination process, which can be very difficult, they're kind of there, and they don't have to worry so much about running for office. And so there's a certain set of traits that you need, I think, to be a good judge, and there's also a certain set of traits you need to be a good politician to be able to
get elected.
Exactly. And so to be a good judge, you need to be thoughtful, you need to be fair, you need to be patient, you need to be willing to listen, you need to be, wise, and that's not necessarily the same traits that make a good politician. And so to be a good politician, you have to be strategic, you have to be willing to talk to people and go out to events and get to know people and develop constituencies. And unfortunately, an elected judge to be successful kind of has to be both. I will say that I've known people who are very good judges but were not very good politicians that did not survive, and some people who were very bad judges who didn't survive even though they were relatively good politicians. You really need to have both, I think, and it's a different skill set. But those are some of the things that I would suggest. To be a trial judge, you also have to be at least somewhat personable, I think, because you're dealing with a lot of people. And so I think that's important. So I like the intellectual challenge. Every week I see a case that I've never seen or an issue I've never seen before. I've been doing this for 13 years. You get to deal with a lot of different people, and that's something that's really I enjoy as well. So you have to be at least somewhat extroverted, but at the same time intellectually curious.
What is the path for the federal bench like?
That's very different. I mean, there is politics definitely that goes into becoming a federal judge, but once you're a federal judge, the politics is not, unless they want to move up, if they want to go from a trial bench to appellate bench, the politics, I think, are much less pronounced than in a trial bench. But to become a federal judge, as you know, you have to be appointed by the president if you want to be an Article III judge or a district court judge. You have to be confirmed by the Senate. It can be a real difficult process just because there's so many different constituency groups that really pay attention to whether or not you're going to be the right person for that position. So there are a lot of people who get considered for federal judgeships that never make it. And it is a good gig. I mean, you get a lifetime appointment. It's a relatively good salary. And you don't have to worry about, you continue to receive your salary for, I believe, the whole remainder of your life. And so not many jobs are that good. So.
Yeah, for sure.
And what are some things that law students can do to prepare themselves for a type of position like yours, or prepare themselves for their career?
That's a good question. To become an elected judge. First off, I think you need to become a good lawyer. I think that's really so. As some people want to rush into this, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. You need to know how to practice law. In Dallas County, we have specialized courts. So, for example, I've always done civil. I would never think to run for a criminal court or a family court or another type of court because that's just not my area of expertise. Develop an area. If you're in a county like Dallas, you want to develop an area of expertise so you're going to be a good judge. But then at some point, you have to start developing a political base, and so that means getting involved. Every county, most counties in Texas, we elect judges on a partisan basis. So most counties are either all Democrat or all Republican. Dallas County is all Democratic. You have to get involved with that party, whatever party is the dominant party, if you really want to have a realistic chance of winning. Although some counties have been flipping back and forth with the different political winds, but you need to get involved in partisan politics, unfortunately, in a state like Texas. And those are kind of what you need to do.
And do you have any general advice for law students that you wish you had when you were going to law school?
I would say find a good mentor. I mean, I will say that a lot of the things, I've been very blessed to have over 250 interns. Hopefully I've shared what I've learned, both good and bad, as I'm practicing law and how to practice law better. I never really had someone like that when I first started. I had, a couple mentors at my first firm that did, a very good job, but they were primarily more focused on, kind of their careers. And so finding a good mentor is really, really important. And there were a lot of things that I like getting more involved in the bar when I was younger in my career. I really wish I had done that. I never did. And if I think I'd had a mentor that kind of guided me in that way, I think it would have helped my career. But finding a good mentor is just so key. Somebody who cares about you, cares about your future, is going to give you honest advice. I think that's invaluable. And you sometimes, it may not be someone who's just like you. Maybe you find somebody, if you're African American, you want to find an African American mentor, but also find a mentor that has succeeded in an area that you want to succeed in. And I think that is really, really important. If you want to be a judge someday, find a judge who's a mentor. If you want to be in-house, chief counsel for, Google, find somebody who's been successful in that area who can kind of help show you the path. Because I will say that my experience has been is if you have a idea of what the path is, it's harder to get from point A to point B. If you have no idea of what the path is from A to B, you're much more likely to get lost and not make it there. So finding someone who can help guide you along that journey, whatever that journey is going to be, I think is really, really helpful. And it's something that, you get so swamped when you're a new lawyer with work that you don't always think about that. And so finding someone who's willing to take the time to help you and guide you, I think is really critical.
Is there anything that you wish that you would have done while you were in law school that you didn't do?
I ended up graduating a semester early, and I think that was probably a mistake. I think I should have. I spent a lot of time working during law school, and that was probably somewhat helpful. But I wish I'd done a little bit more mock trial in the court, and I wish that I had been more. I was not very involved in the journal I was on because it wasn't what I was interested in. I wish I had done more of that. So, it's kind of an interesting balance because when you go to law school, one of the things I tell a lot of my interns, it's a little bit like building a car. So you're building a product, and that's you, who you're going to sell. And so you want to have good grades. You want to be in mock trial and moot court. You want to be on a journal. You want to do all the things that law firms care about. But then at some point, you also need to be able to market that car. So if you don't get a job to do on-campus interviews, and most people don't, you have to market the car. So at some point, you need to get to a point where you're really out there trying to find the best possible position for you. For some people, you may have a lot of options, and for some people, you have very few, but you need to think about that when you're in law school. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it for today. Thank you to our guest speaker, and thank you to all of you for listening to another episode of the Law Lives Project. If you're a prospective law student that's interested in speaking with attorneys one-on-one, check out leguplegal.com. Legup Legal is an online mentoring platform that connects prospective law students with attorney mentors. Sign up for a membership today to learn more about the practice of law and see if it's a good fit for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes or any other platform that you're listening on. If you have any questions or comments about anything you heard on the podcast, or if you have ideas for guest speakers, please contact me by emailing me and my team at info@leguplegal.com. Thanks again, and don't forget to tune in next week.